Hey guys, Toby Mathis here, and today we're going to go over how not to become a financial target in a financial dispute. In other words, how to avoid being targeted by shady lawyers or shakedown artists or frivolous lawsuits. And I'm going to dive right on in by breaking it down into easy bite-sized pieces. The easiest way to look at this is kind of take the 10,000-foot view, which is what can somebody see already? And we already know that there's a list of assets that are out there in what is called a public record, which means the public can access this information. All they have to do is ask for it. And I know you're asking, what is out there? Well, let's kind of go through the list. The number one is real estate. I can look up your name in all the real estate records throughout the United States and see what properties has your name on it. And then I can decide, is this somebody that I want to target in a dispute? And it kind of goes like this. Let me give you two examples. Number one, we had clients that were siblings. They got sued due to ownership of a business and they both got targeted. Our client has anonymity. In other words, we put them behind a wall of anonymity with the structure. So people could not see what they owned. They couldn't see their house. They couldn't see their business assets. They couldn't see what that individual had in the way of investments. The other sibling did not have that wall in place, did not have anonymity. And so they could see the different LLCs that the person owned and their various assets. And so they dropped our client very early on for a very small amount and went years back on the other sibling, even though they were both responsible equally for whatever the alleged makeup lawsuit was. In this particular case, it was actually an injury and there was liability. It was just who were they going to collect against? And they went after one sibling over the other, where the only difference was what they could see. That's why this is so important. Case number two, I had a client who had their dream home just get trashed by a renter. So they bought a house anticipating that when they retired, they would move into it. And in the meantime, they leased it out to a family who destroyed the home. They flooded the downstairs, caused mold, and then sued my client because of the mold. And they went after these individuals. Now, client ultimately prevailed, but something during the lawsuit stuck out, which is they could look up where my client lived, and they said, hey, we can see that they live in this and this neighborhood. Those houses are really expensive. We're sure you can afford to settle. Now, of course, this became a client after this matter already occurred, because had they been in contact with us prior and done what we had told them to do, which would be to get your name out of the public record, they never would have been targeted in the first place. But let's go through again what else they can see. So real estate, it's everything from the home purchase, liens on it, mortgages, all that stuff is visible. But for the most part, you're going to get targeted if you have your ownership details. Most of the time, if they're going to try to open up and look for something that's attached to a property, they need to know you're already associated with that property. So that's the reason anonymity works so well, is because it gets your name off the public record so they don't even know you're associated with the property. Number two is vehicles. Now, I'm not too worried about vehicles. People are like, oh, I'm going to put them in an LLC or this, that, and the other. Cars don't drive themselves. RVs don't drive themselves. Trucks don't drive themselves. The individual who's driving it, or if they're in service of a business, that business are ultimately who's responsible. The household could be responsible. For example, you're responsible for your kids if they're driving your car. But the vehicle itself isn't what is creating the liability. It's the driver of the vehicle. So the vehicles are in a public record, but I'm not horribly worried about it. How about bank accounts? Generally, no. You can't find out. Now, I will say what is available is if you are in a lawsuit and they start doing discovery, you may be able to find out where somebody banks, or if they do some sort of forensic accounting on you and they can get records, then they might be able to tell what your bank accounts are. But no, banks do not report your balance details to the public. Now, they may sell it, so you always have to be careful. If somebody can get a hold of It could even be your credit report, but sometimes they sell that data to third parties where they could get some bank account information. But that's if it is in your name. And this is where it becomes very important when we're doing asset protection planning to make sure that your name isn't on all those bank accounts, that you're using entities to keep it spread out. And that's going to go with number 4 too, investment accounts. Investment accounts, very similar to bank accounts, you won't be able to see. So I'm just going to put like X's by these guys. Generally speaking, they're not going to be able to see that. Number 5, they can definitely see. And this is what gets people in trouble. That is your business ownership. Secretary of States almost universally carry this data in their databases that are accessible by the public. So in other words, if you have 6 LLCs, I can see that you have 6 LLCs unless you're in a jurisdiction that has anonymity and privacy, like Wyoming. That's what we use. Why does it matter? Because if I am looking at you, let's say I'm a tenant, and you're telling me that you're going to kick me out of a rental home, and I'm mad, and I decide to trash your place. Maybe I've been trashing your place all along, and that's why you're kicking me out. But I want to take a shot at you. I'm going to look, and if I see, hey, this guy owns 20 houses in town, that's a lot different than, hey, this thing's in an LLC that only owns this home, or this thing's in a land trust and there's no other land trusts around, so this is the only asset. Very different calculus, especially if they go to a lawyer. That lawyer's going to say, not only can we prevail, but can we collect, especially if they're on contingency. So when they're looking, they want insurance and things like that. But if they see somebody has a whole bunch of properties and they're looking up here, or they're looking here and they see a bunch of businesses and they could see that you own those, that's actually what happened to the sibling that ended up going through many years of litigation as a result and having a massive amount of money extorted out of them or taken out of them as a result. It was because you could see what they owned in the public record, and as a result, no settlements, no nothing. They were squeezing them hard because they figured that they could pay. And by the way, heard that over and over again throughout the years. 28 years I've been doing this. You hear that as a reoccurring theme. They call it deep pockets. That's who the plaintiff lawyers, that's who the greedy lawyers, that's who the people that are doing the shakedowns, that's who they want the deep pocket because they need to collect. It's not about winning a judgment. If they can't collect it, it's not worth anything. So they're going to make sure. Other things that are out there in the public record, judgments, liens, things that are in the public record are like lawsuits, judgments, liens, and lawsuits. I'll just say that. I'll add that in there. I'll sneak that one in there. Judgments, liens, and lawsuits. So you could see that in a public record unless it's under seal. So if, hey, I can see that this person's getting sued all the time and I can look at some of those cases and I can see what assets they have, that might be a backdoor way for me to figure out what you got, especially if you're always getting sued, which is why we want to take the incentive away and make sure that you can't be sued. Now, there's possibly IP or intellectual property, such thing as trademarks, patents, etc., copyrights that you file. That's in a public database too, so I could actually go see. Other public databases that are out there that I would be able to see your name on is UCC Filings. Again, most of the time if you're going this route, you have, which is a uniform commercial code filing where I'm putting a lien against something, which is used as collateral on a loan or whatnot. I can go search that, which is why when you're doing these, they're almost always through a business. So these are the world, this is kind of the world of the public record. I'm looking for what you own and what can I see, which then tells us here's the things that we want to make sure of. If I'm worried about any of these, then the next step is what they won't reveal. And what they won't reveal is entities that are in a, let's just say, business ownership. I can make that a big X if I use Wyoming, for example, or Nevada. If I use a state where that record is not maintained, where there's no ownership, then I can make sure that, hey, how can I make sure my name doesn't pop up in a public record with my business? And you might be sitting here going, but wait a second, I'm in Florida. Like, you have to list the member or the manager. Like, there's got to be somebody. Yeah, well then set up a Wyoming LLC and make it the member of the Florida LLC, right? And now what's listed in the public record is a Wyoming entity. Your name's nowhere in there. You can do that virtually in every state. If you want to, you can create anonymity. And if that's something that immediately clicked with you and you said, holy crap, I'm exposed and I don't want to be, and I want to have a simple solution, reach out to us. Just put down in the comments, hey, reach out to me. I'd like a strategy session, or better yet, just type in strategy and we'll send you a link so that that you could actually talk to somebody to see how quickly your name can be removed from the public records on all those businesses that you have. So that's a big one. Trusts, that's another way to make sure that this will cure this one right up here. If I want to use a land trust, and what a land trust does is it creates a division between the legal ownership that's on the public record and the beneficial use of that asset. So we use it a lot with investors because we'll put a property in a land trust and make the beneficiary an LLC. Why are we doing that? Because we don't want anybody to see the LLC necessarily, so nobody can tie back what other LLCs you have. In the land trust, we're naming either some goofy name or we're using the address of the property. They know there's nothing else out there. So with a trust, you have the trustee disclosed, and we'll use a combination of this and that. Use an entity, or we'll use an attorney to make sure your name's nowhere to be found in the public record, and voila, your name is not there. So if we use an anonymous business, for example, a Wyoming LLC, and make it the trustee of all your land trusts, you could literally own a house, your primary residence, and keep your name off it. And before you say, I want my name on it, there's homesteads and other things, I'm sure. There's IRS 121 exclusions. You don't hurt that. The trust does nothing to that. You can do this, get your name off there. And by the way, I'm going to speak directly to those of you who deal with certain areas of the public. For example, if you're a psychiatrist or a pain doc, or you're in law enforcement or any sort of thing where you might be putting a target on your back if somebody can find out where you live, you don't want that. If you're a landlord, you don't want your name out there. You don't want your tenant showing up at 10 o'clock at night. My business partner, Clint, grew up with that, where people would actually harass his mother when his dad was out of town because he had a bunch of apartment buildings, and they would just, some of those folks would just get nasty. And now hey, I know where they live. I know how to get a hold of them. And we want to make it to where they cannot locate you. We do not want people showing up on your doorstep. If you're in business, we don't want your employees showing up at your house. We don't want your customers showing up at your house unless you want to invite them. There's another thing that's going on. We're seeing it over and over again out there, which is, especially with professional athletes, you're seeing this in the news lately, that they're being targeted with burglaries while they're on the road. They track it with social media, or they see that individual and they find out, look up where their house is. They know they're playing a game out of state, and they go rob the house. And that's happened numerous times, and it's more often than you might realize, especially with social media. Somebody will see an individual is on vacation or whatnot, look up their name, look up where they live, and they know the house is vacant. They know that individual isn't there. They check it out, and then they go in and help themselves to your stuff. Happens way too often, and I've seen it happen on multiple occasions, and it's extremely frustrating because somebody comes back from a trip and they've lost a whole bunch of their goods. It's the violation is extraordinary. How do you fight that? Again, we use this combination, a trust with an anonymous business, or a trust with a straw man or an attorney that's going to go ahead and be on the trustee. So you're using a nominee trustee. And by the way, no, they're not staying on that property, but you're getting the resignation so that they don't have any control over your property, but on public record, their name is still listed. If you need to, you can always change that deed. But what it is making sure your name is not on there. Now, most of our clients, they like using the anonymous entity. as their trustee because they control everything. But nobody can see that they're on it. So those trusts are big ones. Now, there's the other stuff where people go offshore. I'm not a fan of that. I don't even want to talk about that. People are like, oh, I can go offshore. Andersen is an international company. We have offices in the Cayman Islands. We have Europe, in multiple offices, whether it be in London or France, Switzerland, Dubai. But no, we're not taking you offshore. It's very expensive and it's not accomplishing what you want. More importantly, we want a plan that's going to work no matter what. And if you start secreting off and taking stuff offshore, and especially if you don't actually move your assets or have a reason to be offshore, judges don't like it. And that's who I care about. At the end of the day, if I'm going to go fight for somebody, I want to win. And the last thing I want is someone saying, hey, this is a shady character who's moving their, who's playing games, knew that they were creating liability and tried to hide from it. No, what we want is to keep our name private, which is perfectly fine. Assets right there. If there's a legitimate claim against a property, for example, like let's say we have real estate, somebody slip and falls on that property, they can go after that property. What I'm not going to do is subject my clients to massive lawsuits because somebody thinks, oh, this little claim should actually be a big claim because they have deep pockets. What we're trying to do is avoid the frivolous attacks or the attacks where somebody is just targeting you because you're wealthy. Now, if you have an actual liability occurrence, you can minimize it through the same techniques we use. We isolate that risk so that there's a total exposure so you can settle these things quickly. But what we're not going to do is invite a whole bunch of stuff. Now, are there other things that are out there that we should be aware of when people are searching? Yes. If you are sued, expect that someone's going to dig into your stuff, right? Now, when you are in a lawsuit, let's say that you had a car accident, and somebody starts asking for your financial information, I would tap the brakes, no pun intended, right? I would say, no, what does it have to do with whether I was negligent while operating an automobile? And I would be pushing that and trying to get it into something called supplemental proceedings, only if there is actually a judgment. Now, you'll almost always have to disclose the insurance information and then let the insurance company deal with it. What you don't want is to attract somebody who says, this person has a lot more to lose, therefore, I'm going to make claims that are not covered by that insurance policy to try to expand the amount of exposure that individual has so I can get them to cough up more money. That's what we want to prevent, is that type of behavior. We want to keep it, hey, if there's a car accident, I'm all for it. Let the insurance company work it out, and I want to get out of the way. What I don't want to do is invite a bigger lawsuit. And I'll give you an example. I have a very good friend who owns one of the largest agencies in Nevada. And I said, what's the biggest pet peeve you have? And she goes, it's doctors. They get in a car accident and they tell somebody, I'm a doctor. Worst thing that they could say, don't tell anybody you're a doctor, right? Because they're just inviting it. Immediately they're perceived as being wealthy. In the case that was going to be a small little case that they could settle out quickly becomes much bigger because they believe that individual has something to lose. So we're going to make sure that you don't inadvertently do that. Now, there's also private investigators out there, and this is where if they get into some of your real estate, they may be able to see if you have a mortgage on something. They might try to reverse engineer. So if I have a slip and fall on a home and they see that there's a mortgage on it and it's in your name, so it's not a loan through the entity, it's not a commercial loan, then those guys might start digging. And that's why it's really important to say, hey, I want to isolate that liability, make sure that it's real so that they see that there's a liability shield around it. An LLC is a great example. In some states, a land trust will even get it done. But we want to make sure that there's nothing beyond that so that they don't have the incentive to start digging around and seeing what else I have. And then more importantly, that business ownership. I cannot stress this enough. If there was one thing that Andersen does that's where I work and where I'm a partner at, if there's one thing that we do that is the secret sauce, it's getting your name out of the public record with these business entities. Is making sure somebody cannot see what you earn or what you own and start targeting you. Because even if you have personal liability, for example, on something, you get into a car accident, if they can't see what you own, they can't see your house, they don't know where you live, they could try to get that in discovery, right? They might be able to get that. But if we're keeping that scope really narrow, they can't see your businesses. They can't see what hey, I have 10 rental properties and I have a holding company that has a bunch of cash, and if they can't see that, then those actions end up going away much quicker. We see it all the time, over and over again. You'll have a case where they're naming multiple defendants. We see it. Our clients sometimes get picked up in those. And you're like, oh, shoot, what do you do? And you say, you do nothing. Let them do their investigation. They're going to dig in and see what you own. And over again, we literally get quotes like this. It does not appear that your client is a target that we're going to be pursuing. And they'll either do a peppercorn settlement or they'll just outright dismiss them. We see it over and over again. And over the years, it's been too numerous to count. That's what works, is getting your name out of that public record, creating that anonymity shield so that people do not know what you own, so that they don't target you because they perceive you as a deep pocket. If you have comments in this or questions, put them in the comments below. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm. And if you know anybody you want to share this with, just forward it to them. And thanks again.